Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm.
It's like wanting to hear my take on unbossing and getting my advice on being bossy instead.
Let me tell you what I think again.
Hierarchy over ideas.
Figure it out.
Okay. You wouldn't settle for any advice on leadership in today's business world, so don't settle for any insurance. Get the real deal.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. When Sarah Personette was about 7 years old, one of her dad's coworkers asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. She said, a CEO. While not necessarily the typical response from someone at that age, she knew then that it was an important role of leadership. What she didn't know was that the path there would be through advertising agencies, Facebook, Twitter, an Elon Musk acquisition, and an entirely new vision of what media is.
This is Unbossing, a show about reinventing leadership in chaotic times. Each week, we connect with leaders in business and tech and ask them, what did you have to unlearn to succeed again? I'm Rishad Tobaccowala.
And I'm Drew Ianni. Today's guest, Sarah Personette, began her career on the agency side, Starcom, then Universal McCann, where she became U.S. president at the age of just 33. Then she crossed to the social media side, first with Facebook, where she led a 500-person global marketing team, then with Twitter, where she spent 4 years building one of the most trusted relationships in their advertising community as chief customer officer.
And then Elon Musk bought the company. Within days of the acquisition closing, Sarah resigned. She said the most important role she played at Twitter was championing brand safety, and she walked out the door before her stock fully vested to protect that.
A year later, she became CEO of Puck, a 4-year-old media startup built on the premise that journalists are the original influencers, that the future of media belongs to talent and not institutions. She's since led the company through 50% subscription revenue growth, a new franchise model, and the $16 million acquisition of Graydon Carter's Airmail newsletter.
This is a conversation about leading through disruption, from the inside of the biggest companies in the world, and then from outside, building something new. Please welcome the CEO of Puck. You said you wanted to be a CEO since you were 7 years old. Looking back, what did you believe about what it would take to get there that you've had to completely unlearn along the way?
So it is true. I went on the train with my dad. He worked down in Chicago when I was little, and I was on the floor with him. He was a private wealth manager. And one of his colleagues had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, I would like to be a CEO. And I don't think I knew what that meant at the time. I think what the word or the acronym essentially meant to me was I wanted to be a leader. And I did know that. I knew from a young age, just inherently in me was this desire to lead. I don't think that leadership can't be learned, though. I actually do think that leadership and management, which are two different sides of the coin, both of them can be studied and you can really build that skill set. I think there is something really special in thinking about the masculine and feminine characteristics of leadership. And I think probably at a younger age, masculine characteristics being more agentic, probably a little bit more forceful, feminine characteristics being warmer, more empathetic, that leaning into those feminine characteristics, whether you're male or female, actually has been really critical over the course of my career, because I came into my career, it was 2001, dot-com bubble had just burst. A bunch of us were held back from being able to take on the jobs that we were originally offered just due to the economic concerns. Then we started our jobs. We had this incredible growth period. We were hit by the global recession. I was leading a 90-person team at 2026 and having to work through that and the uncertainty that people felt during that time, both our clients and my team of people that were younger than me and that were also older than me. We just didn't know what was around the corner. And so I think during that time frame, what I really learned is that being able to communicate clearly, to acknowledge that people might be feeling something outside of work that they were bringing into work, and then how to create I did not have this language at the time, but a psychologically safe environment for them to be able to produce, for them to be able to focus, but also feel seen in the fact that they were a whole person. And I think that the reason I say I had to unlearn something in order to learn it, I think the displays of leadership probably during my earlier days would have been more around archetypes that were more masculine in characteristic.
Absolutely. And today, there is, and I've written that soft is the new hard, but in many ways, there is, for a little bit, there is this almost swing back to hard. One of your ex-bosses talks about becoming hardcore. Another one of your, which I guess is Mr. Zuckerberg, another one of your ex-bosses, Mr. Musk, is very much about nothing but male characteristics. And as far as I can see, he sees females as cows to increase fertility. But one of the key things is that must be interesting because, in effect, you went from one to the other, which is what made you successful. And at the moment, there is a little bit of a swing back among some of the technocrats to the other side.
Yes. Very interesting. So let's take a quick step back. I joined Facebook in probably 2009, 2010, sub 1,000 people, still a startup, if you will. And I worked there over the course of about an 8-year period. You had Zuck in leadership. You had Cheryl in a COO, huge leadership position. David Fisher, an incredible leader at the company. Carolyn Everson at the company. A tremendous amount of growth in both people, revenue, users on the platform, number of companies that were acquired and integrated or spun out in order to create this full family of apps and services. And so leadership during that time, I think I was really blessed to be at the company when diversity, inclusion, equity, like real equity. When I say that, I mean that everyone's voice equally was heard around the table, was a hallmark of the culture there. And I think now some of the things that you're referencing is just more broadly in corporate America. Even saying DE&I is not something that is pronounced a lot. And I think this discussion is happening across boardrooms across the country. So it was a really special time where, and I don't think these things are lost, should be lost, or shouldn't continue to be valued, because the most challenging, complex problems are solved with diverse perspectives. They are solved with people coming in with different experiences, looking at a challenge in a totally different way, and then creating real dissonance in the conversation for breakthrough ideas to occur. And that's what the foundation of the workforce was at that time. Fast forward, I then went on to Twitter, where I was their chief revenue officer, or the equivalent of that. And I worked for Jack, and I worked for Parag, and then the company was sold to the current owner. And I think, value systems can change over the course of time, but one of the things I really appreciate about this podcast is that it's a study of leadership. And I think for me, I try to be the leader I want to and choose to be each and every day, but I have to define what that is. And for me, that is someone who is kind, who is calm, who is inclusive, and it's tough. Like, I'm a high-performing individual. I expect a high-performing team, but I think you get that through those collective traits. And that's something that I try to consistently strive for. And so for the folks that are listening to your podcast, I think what's important for them as they make decisions in their career is defining what type of leader they want to be by the values and the principles with which they want to operate, and then share those out with people. Because if you're being inconsistent, I think that's where you sometimes lose people along the way. And also look at the leadership and the ecosystem that you're in. Does that reflect your value system, or does it reflect a different leadership system? And if it does, maybe it's not the right place for you, and find another another company or another non-for-profit or another organization where you can really live your truest self.
That makes a lot of sense. Sarah, before I turn it over to Drew, 2 or 3 things that you said that are really significant, and there's a lot of data and research that backs it up. For instance, our previous guest, David Kenny, basically.
I love David.
Yeah, so David had a couple of statements which are very much what you've just said. So one, he basically thinks DEI is a competitive advantage, which is what you believe.
Yep.
And he believes that actually it is about meritocracy by giving everybody in your company the opportunity. He says, obviously, it has to be aligned with business outcomes, but that's sort of one. The second, he had a line which is about values, which is, he says, steer by the stars and not the passing ships. And so he keeps saying, what are the values of what you have or your company has, which is very important. And a couple of other words that you mentioned was psychologically safe and to be seen. All the culture research that I've come down to actually comes down to those 2 things. That in a culture, when somebody is seen and heard, they actually perform much better. So a lot of what you say is reiterated also with research. So it's not only the Personette way, it's probably the way.
Just to build on that, the point on psychological safety and being more productive, the neurological component of that is, if you think about it, if in the boardroom, your talent and your team is spending 50% of their time trying to lower the volume on their imposter syndrome and trying to psych themselves up to be able to share their point of view, then that's 50% of that employee wasted and their talent wasted. And so I think this is probably David's point and your point on the research is like, it's a productivity gain. It is an operational leverage that comes from being able to create an environment for people to be able to really be their full selves in an environment that's safe.
There's so much to talk about. I want to jump in a little bit on imposter complex here. We have a similar background on the agency side, where at 29, the late, great Phil Duesenberry and John Osborne and Alan Rosenshine asked me to be the CEO of BBDO, of Atmosphere BBDO. You had managed some people. I had never managed a person or a P&L in my life. Yeah. Only in Internet 1.0, we know this. Could this have happened?
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. And I had massive monster imposter complex. I question myself every day. And I think imposter complex, it doesn't just have to be, oh, I'm a 20-something into a CEO position and am I qualified and all that. It could be you just going into the CEO position at Puck. It could be someone who's a VP who just got promoted to SVP and it's, oh my God, I'm in this position now and I have imposter complex. I believe also, even at the highest levels now with AI, everybody feels some imposter complex. Even if you've been extremely successful, you're very high performing, am I still relevant? Yeah. So do you have advice on just battling, fighting, and dealing with imposter complex?
Yes, I do. I've experienced it frequently. And I'll get into a little bit of advice. But one thing, I don't know if you guys are big readers of Adam Grant, but I read all of his work. And I think it was in Hidden Potential, he wrote about it, in the imposter syndrome as actually being a real strength. And the research that he did was looking at competency and confidence. And he said that those that do not have imposter syndrome tend to have super high confidence and lower competency. And those that have the imposter complex have super high competency, but oftentimes much lower confidence. And so because of that flip, they wind up working so much harder for the team, for the business, for the company, trying to almost overcome that gap that exists between confidence and competence. And so the first thing that I would say to anyone, that reframe for me was just really important. I think it was like an important self-coaching moment to say, when I'm in those moments, hey, see this as a strength, don't see it as a weakness. And so that is the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is just being able to acknowledge that you are hearing that voice in your head and actually putting a name to it and telling yourself, literally self-coaching yourself to turn the volume down, because similar to the point around psychological safety, if that voice is reverberating in your head, it's actually holding you back from being productive and being your most successful self in that meeting or in that moment. And then the last thing I would share is similarly. So the incredible Jackie Kelly, who Jackie is just truly one of the best all-time leaders. So she had my dream from the moment I was 22 years old, working at Starcom Media Vest Group in Chicago. My dream was to run an agency someday. And it was actually the reason why, kind of coming out of the global recession, looking up and looking out at the time, many of the CEOs in the agency space, they didn't have real product tech and data expertise. So I took what people saw as a demotion and moved over to this company, Facebook, that not a lot of people had heard of. And what it did is it allowed me to get just incredible experience and exposure to the inner workings of a super fast-growing technology company. And it gave me new language. It gave me, I believe in being the master of your own education. And I felt like the education was in the experience. It really was like the best example of experiential learning. But throughout that experience, I was very open that I wanted to run an agency someday. And Jackie and I had worked together, and she wound up tapping me at 33. Now, I had run big teams at that time. And I'd started in the Facebook world, I had started up a team and built that team out globally. So I was coming in with some hard competencies and hard skills relative to running a company, but I had never run a company before. And she asked me to come in and run Universal McCann for the US. And I definitely had that same experience that you had at BBDO Matmosphere, just kind of questioning, like, am I capable of doing this? Is this, something that I can take on this challenge? And I think just being very candid, there were a few people who did not want me in that role, and they were
I had more than a few.
Yes. And so that takes your imposter syndrome and amplifies it, because they literally are playing it back to you. And no matter how good your work is, and no matter how good your work ethic and your vision and your strategy and your execution is, that's hard when that's in front of you. And so the way that, the last piece of advice I would give to folks, the way that I conquered that, aside from developing the strategy, executing the strategy, creating a high-performing company, the other way that I did is I said to myself, I'm like, I am going to lead for the 997 people that are in this agency, not the 3 that don't want me in this position.
Yep.
Because those 907, they wanted a leader. They wanted someone to look up to. They wanted guidance. They wanted support. And I think sometimes the small group of people that are trying to pull you down, I would say, don't let them take that power and have that power. And, you like, and it's hard to do, but if you can rise to that occasion and move forward, it's pretty powerful. And it sounded like you had a similar experience.
I did. And a related question to this, Sarah, is fear. The one sentiment that I would say Rishad and I have encountered amongst the 100 people we talked to before we launched the Athena Project to say, how can we help you? What are the gaps you're still looking to fill? Tell us about how you feel right now. And was so much fear, even from very senior, accomplished people. But my question isn't so much how you overcome your fear, whether it's fear of just staying relevant and being resilient. But not a lot of people talk about your teams have fear. Every individual has fear, whether they're junior and they think AI might take their job, whether they're in the middle and they think, am I going to get cut in some sort of reorganization and I'm the fat that gets trimmed at the top level. Again, going back to, am I relevant anymore with everything happening around me? And then just things happening in the world. There is this palpable sense of fear. Do you have advice for managing the fear of your team members as opposed to managing your own fear?
Yes. And I'll talk through an old example, and then I'll talk through a current example. So the first thing I would say is, have you guys talked about VUCA on this podcast before?
We have not.
Okay. So VUCA is just a phenomenal framework, I think, for understanding leadership and managing through that fear that you were just describing, Drew. So coming out of the post-Cold War period, the U.S. War College was trying to think through how they essentially prepare and train the military for just a totally different world. And VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the sentiment was essentially like, at this stage, you have to be prepared for the fact that there is just going to be constant volatility. There's going to be constant gray. You're going to have fear as a result of that, right? If that is your day-to-day now and it's no longer as much of like a structured, balanced world, then how do you lead through that? So in my earliest days of Twitter, I would talk to my team about that because the platform was an open and public platform. Anything that happened in the world on any given day happened and reverberated through the platform. And so that could mean if, for example, when the Queen passed away, that meant that every advertiser went dark. And, the team had to manage for that. When the social justice movement happened and the entire conversation and a really a societally challenging conversation happened on the platform, it happened to our team, it happened to our workforce. And then certainly in that last year, with a very public acquisition that had a lot of uncertainty around it, a lot of concern around, will we have a job? Will we lose a client? Or will we lose clients? All of those things manifested. And so in not knowing that COVID would happen or the social justice movement or that the company would be sold, not knowing any of those things, in the earliest days, I talked about leading through a VUCA world and the characteristics of being planful, of being agile, of being really flexible, of being empathetic to yourself for, and acknowledging that feeling you might have, and also acknowledging that others around you might also be experiencing some form of concern or fear, and both your colleagues as well as your clients oftentimes were experiencing those things. So when we wound up moving through really first the global pandemic, I think the constant communication, we would do almost weekly AMAs and to size the team. I mean, this is like a 2,000 plus person organization across every country around the world. And we're all coming together, and both myself and my incredible leadership team at the time, talking very openly about this, identifying that this is an example of where VUCA really helps you name the fear and then appreciate it, but then also be able to march forward. So I think that's one thing that has been helpful. The more recent story that I would give is we're doing a lot of workforce transformation around AI. And that's not the illuminating point. I think most companies, if they aren't, they should be. And I will say this, I think the paradox that we are facing right now is that in the current moment, we're training people on how to use AI-enabled tools. Fast forward 2 years from now, we're actually going to need to be training people on craft. And so we're going to have to get that balance right, because AI compresses effort, but it does not compress expertise. And so as we've been leading this transformation, some of the guidance that I had gotten from folks was, you will encounter a lot of fear from individuals, that they will think they're going to lose their job, they will protest, all of those types of things. And I think when you know that whether it's back in the day, digital disruption and digital transformation, or it is workforce transformation with AI, calling that out and sharing with people that this actually is a really good thing for your career. If you don't learn it here, you are going to be forced to learn it somewhere else. And we actually do a AI spotlight every week where some team member shares a story around how they are utilizing and leveraging the technology today. And I think the ongoing exposure to this helps to illuminate that it's possible at any level to start to understand it. And we do prompt training these are sometimes the most basic examples to the most sophisticated examples. And that spectrum, I think, allows people on the fear spectrum to say, okay, that I'm that person. I can meet myself there and I can start to try that. I have a saying, start by starting. And I'm like, just start. There's absolutely nothing that can go wrong. If you have an idea, if you have a concept, if you have a project that you want to do, just start by starting and then you'll learn along the way. And we've tried to reinforce that inside of the company.
Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm.
It's like wanting to get advice on longevity in leadership, but instead getting generic retirement tips while on a cruise ship.
It's certainly a different take on people who want to go places.
You wouldn't settle for just any marketing podcast, so don't settle for any insurance. Get the real deal.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. You talked about COVID, and Rishad and I are in agreement, and I think a lot of people we talk with agree. We haven't really dealt with and fully recovered from COVID. And so we went from COVID and then into more madness with the election, and then AI has just consumed us, and we forgot about this remarkably impactful event. My question is fairly specific, though, in regards to you've now had time as a CEO managing a team. Have you netted out at a policy in regards to office versus home? Is it down to the individual and their role? Do you have a specific, either so many days a week in the office? And have you come to a conclusion of a right balance as it relates to work from home and being in the office? We don't talk about this anymore. It's like fundamentally huge.
I say this all the time. I completely agree with you. We forgot that COVID happened.
Completely.
And I don't know how. It was really like a 3-year period. If you think about first year of major lockdown, then you had vaccinations, but there was still like a lot of uncomfortability. And then there was a hangover effect. So yes, and it strikes me all the time that I'm sad that some of the things that were supposed to be the bright spots, which would be something like hybrid workforces that allow for different schedules and different people to re-enter the workforce that might not be able to do an hour-long commute if they have childcare or different things like that.
Right.
So to answer your question, historically, pre-COVID, I ran primarily globally distributed teams. And so the concept of being in a singular space and that performance equated presence just didn't exist. So I always used to say to my teams, I focus on performance, not on presence. If you're performing, then I really don't care if you are picking up your kid at 3:00 and then back online at 9:00. Like my schedule was, I had Japan meetings at midnight. I had Ireland meetings at 5 a.m. And so giving people the respect to create the schedules that they need, I think was really important. Fast forward post-COVID, I will get to our policy, but I think what did need to occur, and this was interesting, Jack at one point declared you can work from home forever, wherever during COVID. And that was too broad. We had people that wanted to work in different countries where we didn't have appropriate tax codes there. And then revenue recognition would be challenging. So just, from a company perspective, there are some real things that need to be considered. But what we did get to was by function, how do you think about training and learning and connection? And I think that was probably the first piece that was important. Certain teams and certain positions really do need to be in person because they're hearing and they're learning and they're evolving based on being connected. And there are some teams where it's more individualistic and just that in-person connection once a month or once a quarter is enough to create that personal trust in that experience and that engagement. And then you can go back to really being fully remote. And that's for like larger companies. In the puck world, which is also inclusive of Airmail, we acquired Airmail at the end of last year. And so we brought those two companies collectively together. We have a distributed workforce. We have a bunch of folks in LA. We have a bunch of folks in DC. We have folks scattered in other markets where there's less concentration, and then a couple of folks overseas. But our headquarters are in New York. And there is, for our reporters, they are remote and they can come into the office anytime they want to, but they should be reporting, they should be sourcing, they should be doing relationship development. When it comes to our sales team, there's a lot of learning and collaboration that happens, but there's also a lot of selling that means being in market. So that's really a 3 to 4 day in the office. And then the other couple of days, you work from home, travel, whatever it might be. And then I would say across the rest, it's really a hybrid. Like, again, focus on performance, not on presence. If you want to be in the office on Monday and Tuesday, great. If you don't want to be in the office on Thursday and Friday, but you are still performing and you are getting your work done, that is great. I think the crux of all of this is that you have to have the open conversation. Your manager has to align on what the work is and how the team best works together. And so if it's important for everyone to be together at least 1-2 days a week, then assigning what days those are and getting everyone's agreement, I think really helps. And then there's the other side where we see all these firms going back to 5 days a week. And that's really a real estate cost. Like, that's a real estate justification. And,
JP Morgan.
There's
Yes.
a whole host of things going on there. So
you spend $1 billion on a new headquarters. You kind of want people to be there, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think as long as you're transparent about that and you're like, hey, this is what's required for this role and for this culture and company, then that's their state. So I think it's probably less one size fits all, but respect and communication is probably the core to it.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, we began with you as a 7-year-old wanting to be a CEO. And now at Puck, you are a CEO. And it is an extraordinary company, and both Drew and I are fans and subscribers. And the 3 or 4 things that stand out for us are the following, and I'd love you to comment on it. One is, it's a new type of journalism in both focusing on absolutely amazing talent, to your point, craft, who have an equity ownership in their work, which is number one. So that's a relationship between the company and the talent. Second is you all have close to 70% open rates, which means your subscribers have a relationship with the talent, which is also interesting. And in today's world where people are thinking about journalism as a commodity, you all have found a way utilizing points of view and relationships to differentiate yourselves. So tell us a little bit about how do you lead such an organization where you have these high-powered, world-class talent who are also equity owners, and you're the CEO? And you're working with founders and everything else.
Excellent question. So I'll zoom out and share. So for those that are not familiar with Puck, Puck provides industry-leading coverage across DC and politics, Hollywood, the business of fashion, the business of artificial intelligence, the business of arts, finance, media and entertainment. And it started as a company that really created elevated private newsletters. Rishad, you were just referencing this incredible leading talent. Our first journalist that joined with our founder, John Kelly, is a gentleman by the name of Matt Bellany. And if you are in the media and entertainment space, as an executive, through to an early career person, you can't be in the entertainment industry without reading that. And we've really taken those private newsletters, and I've been at the company basically 2.5 years, but I'm in my 3rd year of executing our 5-year long-range plan. And we've elevated those sort of single newsletters into multi-platform franchises, where we have newsletters, we have podcasts, we have events, all centered around that anchor talent across those 8 marquee industries. And the thesis that John Kelly, our founder, had is that journalists are the original influencers. They are the original creators. And he grew up in Vanity Fair and at Bloomberg, the New York Times. One thing that he often saw is that if there were any type of budget cuts, usually the people that first were cut actually were the journalists, the ones that were making the product. And in the tech space, the ones that are making the product are the product and engineers. They're the last people to go. Like they are the people that are making sure that innovation and transformation continues to occur at a company. And I think John really understood that. And that's why he had this thesis and built the company around centering these newsletters. And eventually we built out these multi-platform franchises around this core talent. And maybe this wasn't as prevalent 5 years ago, but today, now journalism driven by personality and perspective and real people matters more than ever before. And I think that's why Puck is in such an incredible position, because that's been another core component of our strategy, is really making sure that the people that we're bringing on are the best, really truly the best in their industry.
Well, I want to sneak one quick one in based on what you said there. This whole idea of your 5-year plan, strategic planning. Oh my God. How do you do strategic planning now? Do you have advice for, let's say you're in the middle of a 5-year plan, do you just kind of throw it out and adjust it and say, our horizons are now 6 months or a year and a half? With everything changing so fast, how do you do long-term strategic planning?
There are those that rise to the occasion. When AI hit when let's call it Google Zero hit last January in particular, the news industry and really any referral traffic type of business was dramatically impacted. And you can either see that as an opportunity to experiment and learn and have patience. Business is long. While we might have a short lifespan at the current moment, the way that John and I think about the company is that we're building a modern media company for decades to come. And so I think being able to test and learn and be comfortable in that that's modeled from the top, and it's modeled from the board, right? You need to have a board that also is open to those conversations. And I think in some other industries and in some other companies, the ability to flex and try new things is sometimes a little bit more
really
more
embrace
challenging.
The chaos right now. Or if you're not the type that's really sort of built for that, then bring people around you that like to embrace the chaos.
Yes.
I'll let Rishad close us out here.
That's amazing. So Sarah, thank you again for your time, which was absolutely wonderful. We could have chatted for hours and hours. Thank you again.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your journey and insights with us here on the podcast. You gave us a masterclass in letting go of what you've built when a company's mission and objectives change and no longer align with your goals, and about how to reinvent a new type of company for a new time.
Thought it was a great conversation, Rishad. It seems like with each of our episodes here, we're starting to see a lot of through lines and consistencies. And the biggest one still for me today is trust. There is a crisis of trust, and building trust into your cultures, into your products, into your relationships with your customers, your teams. It's all about trust, isn't it?
It is about trust, but what also I found really interesting were the 3 or 4 unlearning and unbossing things that came through. One was the unlearning that is important is early on her framework were masculine, which she called agentic and force-driven ways of thinking, to more feminine, which is both warm and empathetic. And as she says, both men and women can practice both. And this, which is warm and empathetic, allows for psychological safety and to be seen, which become both the differentiators in a business and ensure that in a world of change, people don't have to spend a whole bunch of their time and cognitive things trying to figure out what their bosses are up to. The other one, which is while the world changes around us, value systems should remain the same. And she talked about both the combination of kindness, calmness, and toughness, which is intensely important. And that all of us as leaders might be imposters. And in fact, the difference between an imposter and a non-imposter is between competency and confidence, where sometimes imposters have a lot of competency but less confidence, and others have a lot of confidence but less competency. And in many ways, imposter syndrome can work for you because to a great extent, you are very competent but not completely confident. So you try to keep getting better.
Yeah, no, I think this idea also of the ultimate sort of unlearning, the ultimate sort of unbossing is just how AI and how quickly things are changing and how no one really has the answers moving forward. And it puts you at a level playing field with virtually everybody else. So it's unlearning and really sacrificing your ego and saying, we're all learning together. I may be more quote unquote senior. I may be more quote unquote accomplished. I may be more seasoned. And there's advantages to all of that. But there are certain areas where it's not necessarily an advantage other than maybe your ability to learn and your ability to know when you need to unboss yourself. That's it for today's episode. If our conversation with Sarah Personette got you thinking about how disruption works for or against your professional growth, take a moment to leave us a rating and a review. It helps more people find these conversations.
Follow Unbossing on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're not already subscribed, this is a great time to start. We have more conversations like this one coming. The world is asking all of us to unlearn something. The question is whether we're brave enough and actually do it. I'm Rishad Tobaccowala.
And I'm Drew Ianni. And this was Unbossing. See you next time.
Unbossing is a Bubbler Media iHeart podcast production. If you're not in the conversation, you're not in the game.